Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the summit so far. Before we head into introductions, we want to start out with an icebreaker activity on the next slide. So what is your internal weather today? How are you feeling? Is it a stormy day with choppy waves? Is it a sunny day and you feel like dancing in the streets? Or is it none of these? Is it something completely different? Let us know how you're feeling in the Q&A.
I am feeling like the sunny sunshine outside my window, Jen, because I get to talk with you and hear from teachers. I'm super excited about that. That's my internal weather. What's your internal weather?
I'm feeling a little partly cloudy.
Okay,
Honestly, I'm a little nervous
fair.
talking with all y'all, um, mostly because of technology. But so far, it's been smooth sailing. I don't feel those choppy waves like I see on the slide here.
Hmm.
Let's see what folks have to say. We have folks feeling that they're super hot but stormy,
Ooh, drama.
overcast, sunny with a little bit of clouds, and maybe a little bit like how I'm feeling today.
A cool 76 degrees and hanging loose. I like that.
That sounds like perfect internal weather right now.
That sounds really ideal, actually. Yeah.
Feeling breezy, nothing clouds. Love it.
Oh, gloomy with occasional bursts of sunshine. I'm glad you have those little bursts of sunshine, whoever you are, friend.
Oh, it's somebody's birthday. Well, happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday.
Feeling sunshiny. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Let's go into introductions on the next slide. So my name is Jennifer Reifsteck, and I'm Education Specialist for K through 12 Learning at the National Museum of Asian Art.
And I'm Elizabeth Dale-Deines. I am the Teacher Programs Coordinator at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and Renwick Gallery.
Next slide, please. It's a little bit of housekeeping before we go through our agenda. We're going to be participating in a movement activity today. So if you could clear an area for movement, but you can do these movements seated in a chair as well. We're going to be writing today, so participating in written reflections, a writing activity. So please have paper and something to write with handy. And throughout today's session, please share in the Q&A box. We want this to be as interactive as possible on the platform. So next slide, please. So today's agenda, we're going to start out with a centering practice. And then we're going to engage in a slow looking at art activity. This activity is adapted from a virtual field trip called Artful Movement. And then with Elizabeth, we're going to practice slow looking at art with some writing activities. We'll have time for personal reflection and an opportunity to share a resource with you all. Next slide, please. So what is slow looking and what does that have to do with social and emotional learning? So slow looking is an inquiry practice. It's intentionally taking the time to slow down and observe more than you can notice at first glance. So slow looking is a practice, it's a learned skill, and it's a transferable skill. And what does that mean for social emotional learning? Well, by slowing down, we learn to examine our emotions. We learn to reflect about how we're feeling and define our emotions. And by reflecting on our emotions and defining them, we're able to self-regulate. And when we take the time to notice beyond what we can see at first glance, we start to uncover our judgments, our bias. And when we take on others' perspectives, we develop empathy. So social emotional learning skills are all fostered by slowing down. So let's take the time to slow down now in our next slide through a centering activity. So go ahead and look around the space that you're in. Take in the light and the shadows, the objects that you see. And don't forget to look behind you. And go ahead and name 3 things that you see as you look around. I see a painting. I see the door to my closet. And I see a window. And as you look around again, notice what feels familiar to you. Most likely you're in a space that's familiar to you, or you might be noticing things that feel familiar, even though you're not in a regular space. And as you look around, ask yourself, is anything unfamiliar? Is anything strange? Is there anything I should be concerned about? And then finally, ask yourself, am I safe here? And with that feeling of safety, I invite you to close your eyes or soften the focus of your eyes. I'm going to keep my eyes open so I know that I'm connected to you all. And as you close your eyes or soften your focus or look down at the floor, notice all the ways you feel connected. Perhaps you can feel the connection of your feet on the floor. Perhaps you notice the connection of your body in the chair or a couch. Perhaps you notice the connection of your hands on your lap or in an armrest. And start to soften your body just a little bit more. Rolling the shoulders up, back and down to give yourself a nice tall spine. Allowing your chin to be parallel with the floor so you have some space between your chin and your chest. Softening your jaw, your forehead, and your face. And then bring all your awareness to your soft belly breathing. Breathing in to fill your belly up like a balloon. And on the exhale, letting your belly soften towards your spine. Let your breath be smooth and soft and continuous. And let's take one more deep breath in and And exhale it out. Thank you, everyone. Now let's look at a work of art together on the next slide. So let your eyes wander all over this image. Take in the colors that you see, the lines that you see, the shapes, the textures. And now let's go to the next slide where we can zoom in to that figure you may have noticed in the top corner and take in some new information. Go ahead and let your eyes wander all over the image again. Take in the colors that you see, the lines that you see, the shapes, the textures, all the details. And let's have one more close look on the next slide. So again, let your eyes wander all over this image. Perhaps you're taking in new information about what you're seeing. Now let's talk about what we saw and what we noticed. So go ahead and share in the Q&A as you looked at this work of art. What jumped out to you? What did you see? What did you notice?
Jen, I know we have a little bit of a delay, so while people are sharing their thoughts, I'm going to jump in if that's okay with you. Yeah, okay. So I noticed this like black curl first. And then as we got closer and closer, I noticed the texture of this figure's skin and how red it is. So like high contrast colors, I was noticing that.
Okay, so you're noticing first your eye kind of centered onto that line, that curling line. You notice the contrasts that were happening between the background and the foreground, but also noticing this red figure.
Yeah. Some people are noticing the details of the fabric and calling this black space perhaps shadows or smoke. Seems to be blood. The smile of a devilish figure became friendlier. Ooh, that's a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
And then some people are making some connections perhaps to different cultures and thinking a little bit about whether it's Japanese or another kind of painting, but noticing Russian swirls, which I thought was really interesting too.
Yeah. Someone's noticing the bright red lines compared to the soft curls and that rounding, swirling shape you notice, Elizabeth. So again, that sense of feeling of like contrasts that are happening in this work of art. Yeah.
Ooh, human face with clawed feet.
Okay.
And that this figure has some tools in their hands, maybe some drumsticks.
Okay.
And then some words like intimidating or menacing warrior, but then things got more fluffy and cloud-like as we got closer, so it became less intimidating.
Oh, someone's noticing those dark speckles on the light space. So again, that feeling of contrast. Again, the swirling smoke, puffy and cloud-like.
Oh, red is powerful and draws me in.
Okay.
It makes people think of scorpions and dragons, certainly very
fun.
powerful.
You know, if we were, I would ask that participant, what do you see that makes you say that as a follow-up? Yeah.
That's a great follow-up question.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're ready for our next slide here. I know some folks started to share this with the initial seeing. How does this image make you feel? What are you feeling when you look at this image?
I feel as we got closer, I felt like my internal weather changed, Jen, because like I was like originally looking at it and the figure was so far up at the top of this long kind of scroll, and it felt like a very distant and far away kind of like, to use the word from one of our participants, powerful figure. And then as we got closer, the face didn't look so, you know, stern and grumpy anymore. It felt sort of like, oh, there's a something in there that I could connect with. So
that's so interesting that you say that. Yeah, that the scale of the image, this feeling of like this length and this figure in the corner that seems like towering or menacing, as someone was saying in the Q&A, you know, felt there's some tension there. But then with the zooming in, you know, noticing then the face of the being and it not feeling so menacing, that feeling of connection with it, that kind of took that feeling of intimidation away.
People are like, there's such a blend of ideas in the chat box here. We've got icky, like worms, in danger, but then awe and intrigue from some other folks. That's a really interesting mix.
Yeah, intimidating, a feeling of danger, like the smoke is consuming. Okay. Oh, interesting. At first, it was sad and dark, twisted. And then I thought about the creature gathering its power and spreading it out.
There's a narrative there if I ever heard one. That's great. So dangerous
feeling
to
at first
docile.
Dangerous and then docile. Yeah. Oh, at first feeling haunted, and then with zooming in, thinking of action or a sense of celebration, perhaps.
That's a really interesting transition too. It's in cutting the picture down and zooming us in the way that you did, which is a super practical classroom strategy. You really helped shift the focus.
And I would love to ask that participant the follow-up question of, tell me more about the celebration. What feels like a celebration to you in this work of art? I would love to have that conversation.
Oh, I so appreciate this last note here. And I initially felt menace and foreboding, but after hearing other opinions, I can see it's not as scary. So how valuable to be able to have a conversation about the shifting of our
that's really
emotional
fascinating. And it goes back to, you We took that time to really slow down. We looked beyond what we noticed first glance, but then we're also taking the perspective of others and seeing where they're coming from and how what their response is like to this work of art. Yeah. So going to the next slide, again, some people were thinking of stories already in terms of what they were thinking about when they're looking at this work of art. So go ahead and elaborate on that a little bit. What do you think is going on? And who might this being be that we're looking at in this corner? Do you have any thoughts, Elizabeth?
I mean, I feel badly. I don't want to put my ideas in other people's heads, but I'm going to assume we have some really like strong-minded educators in our midst, because I know teachers are really good at following their own thoughts in a really valuable way. So I'm just going to jump in with the longer I look at it, the more this curl feels kind of like an ocean or something about to crash. And it's like this figure is bringing it along. There's something that it's doing with its hands that feels like it's kind of directing the crash. So it feels like the figure has some kind of nature power that I don't understand yet, but I don't think that this figure is all good or all bad anymore. So that's a kind of a weird in between place for a story.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So you have this idea that this being could be kind of orchestrating this wave that has some sort of power to control whatever's happening in this scene. And it's neither good or bad. It's just a being. Yeah. What are some folks saying?
Oh, wow, it looks like a devil unleashing its smoke power with the sticks.
Okay.
Oh, and Diablo is another word coming in, so that's an interesting something mocking something. Interesting. So like we've got like a devil on the shoulder kind of person or figure, it seems like. A demonic drummer boy. He's setting out to rock our world. I like that. And so this is actually really interesting. So we've got like this devil strand, we have a deity strand. So like some people are thinking that's some kind of a warrior god.
Warrior.
But then seahorse, that's interesting.
Powerful comes up, magical. Yeah, bringing some sort of power or storm or the darkness itself. A demon. Okay. Great. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts, everyone. Let's learn a little bit more about this work of art on the next slide. So the title of this work is Thunder God, and it's by the Japanese artist Hokusai. And it's a hanging scroll here, you can see in the gallery when it was installed. And it was painted by the artist when he was 88 years old. And Hokusai called himself the man mad about painting. And the thunder god comes from Japanese Shinto stories, the thunder god being the deity who creates thunder and lightning. So we're going to move our bodies now. So I invite you to stand up, or you can stay seated in your chair if you'd like, to find some space to move. And we're going to feel that thunderstorm in our bodies. So let's start off by bringing our feet together, bringing one hand on top of the other, and bringing our hand to below our navel. Roll those shoulders up, back and down, away from your ears. And just start to relax into this standing shape. Coming back to your soft belly breathing. And you might find yourself start to rock and sway as you relax your body into this shape. Imagine you're a bamboo, gently swaying in the wind. You're feeling rooted and strong, supported and sure. You're floating in the breeze, yet you do not break. You're flexible and yielding to the wind. And now the wind starts to pick up. So step out a little bit, remove your hands, bring them to the sides, keep your knees nice and soft, and start to turn at your hips and the waist. Letting your arms swirl around you like that cloud that we saw in the work of the art. And you can turn and look over your shoulder as you sway back and forth. And then the wind starts to pick up, so start to go a little faster. Breathe in and let's hear that wind howl. And with that wind comes a heavy rain cloud. So step your feet out wide, heels in, toes out, bend those knees. Bring your arms up into your heavy rain cloud. Inhale up, float up, heavy rain cloud. Exhale, sink down low and get heavier, heavy rain cloud. Inhale up and exhale. How heavy and low can you go? Beautiful. And with that heavy rain cloud comes the rain. So stand up tall, bring your fingertips to your head and make it rain. Make some raindrops on your head. Make some raindrops on your forehead, on your jaw, on your face. Bring those foreheads to your drops to your chest. And then the raindrops get heavier. Open up one arm and slap down the arm. Slap up the arm and back to your chest. Raindrops, heavy raindrops down the other arm. Up the arm, back to your chest. Heavy raindrops on your back. Heavy raindrops on your legs. Down and up. Heavy raindrops on your chest. And in the distance, we hear the thunder. Go ahead and inhale and And with the thunder comes lightning. So inhale those arms up overhead, clap, and crash the thunder. One more time, inhale up, crash the thunder, and back to the thunder. And the lightning up, inhale up, inhale up, and the thunder, and the rain, and the rain. Make any movements if you want. If you want to go back to thunder, if you want to go back to lightning. Great job. And then the raindrops started to slow down. And that heavy rain cloud started to fly away. And just as quick as the storm came, it flew away. And coming back to our bamboo in the wind, our bamboo stayed strong and sure, flexible in the storm. Take some deep breaths here and notice how your body feels. And relax it down. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me in this practice. So you just experienced an abbreviated version of our Artful Movement field trip program that combines slow looking at art and mindful movement. So now I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, where we'll continue to explore the theme of what feels strange and what feels familiar to us in art.
Thank you, Jen. I have a question for you. I know I'm going off script, but I found that really challenging to slow down. And I wonder, what if teachers fear that their students are going to find that same challenge?
In terms of slowing down when looking at the art, or
Yeah, just
in the movement, or
slowing down when looking at the art.
slowing down and looking at the art. I think the centering activity helps for sure.
Mm-hmm.
When you start to examine your environment and know that you're in a safe space, when you're feeling safe, you're ready to learn,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel ready to slow down. So for me, that centering experience, however you want to form it, is a really powerful experience that initiates the slowing down. You know, getting those, feeling your breath and feeling your body, and knowing that you're safe in the room that you're in.
Yeah, thank you. And that connects so beautifully with what Mr. Russell was talking about when he was talking about the space in his classroom. Thank you for that. I needed that because I was like, maybe I'm dysfunctional. I had a really hard time. Thank you for that. Thank you for giving me the challenge of being in my body and walking me all the way through that. I am going to invite all of us to look at the next slide together, and we're going to pursue, just as Jen mentioned, this theme of familiar and unfamiliar. And what we recognize when we look at the world around us is that the world is peopled with this incredible variety of folks whose bodies look different from ours, and who think differently from us, or speak in a different way, or have different abilities. And when we look at all of that variety, it might feel like, well, how in the world am I going to navigate challenging conversations or the challenges of everyday life? And what I posit here is that artwork gives us an opportunity to practice the kind of conversational skills that will help us make connections across difference. So we're starting with these three artworks. You can see they're labeled A, B, and C from left to right on the screen. And I'm going to invite each one of you to look at each individual artwork. And first, seek the one that seems most comforting or familiar. And in the Q&A, write the words familiar and then a letter. So maybe if you think A feels the most familiar, you would write familiar A in the Q&A box. And for those of you who might like a little bit of a verbal description, in the leftmost artwork, we see figures, some of whom are seated, facing away from us, some of whom are looking toward us on a green bench in some kind of a public-looking space. In the center artwork, we see a person who, to my eyes, seems female, holding a child, and above her is a sign, which is 6 triangles making a circle. They're in red and black. And then the rightmost artwork is dark around the outside, and we're looking, it seems, up toward 3 figures who are up on a trapeze. So which one of these seems the most familiar? Oh, interesting. So most people are saying A and B feel the most familiar. So you've done my job for me, which was to ask which the least familiar was. And the least familiar in this case, the strangest one, seems to be C. So what I'm going to ask our amazing PowerPoint advancer to do is advance to the slide C that matches C. One more. You're getting a preview, everybody. These are the steps of the activity that we're going to work through together. Just like Jen, if you'll keep advancing, you're going to get to this slide just with that artwork on it. Just like Jen tested the activity that she just walked us through during her field trips online, we have tested the activity that we're about to do together. Perfect, just stop right there. With classrooms all over the country, some teachers were generous enough to try this out. And so I can confidently tell you that this works. This work is simply called Trapeze Girls. So it's easy to tell you the title here without ruining anything. Would you please make sure you have your piece of paper and pencil? And we are going to exercise through independent journaling some of the kind of skills that are valuable for working with people who are unlike us. And to begin with, we're going to move through a step-by-step process similar to the one that Jen walked us through earlier. So if you'll push ahead one and activate the animation, you'll see we have 3 steps on this slide. So on your own page, would you please begin by just making an inventory of things that you see? My challenge, should you need a challenge, is to write 5 things. And I see Jen's doing that. And then I'm going to challenge you to write 5 more. The first 5 are usually the ones that are just sort of screaming at you, right? The really, what people might label as obvious things. The second 5 things are when you're really practicing that slowing down, that slow looking, the looking again. And when we're dealing with other people, or other people are dealing with us, how good it feels when people are ready to look again. So Jen, would you share like 2 things from your second list of 5? What did you see?
Yeah, I guess for me, again, I'm seeing there's really stark contrasts.
Yep.
There's really heavy lines around the figures, in particular their legs.
Mm-hmm.
And then the contrast between the light and shadow, the dark in the background, and that really heavy light around the trapeze.
Yeah. What an interesting phrase, heavy light. And I agree with you, but it's like light seems to be this ephemeral, untouchable thing. But here it has the weight to it. It's really interesting. Okay, so for all of us, let's move on in your own independent journaling to step 2. And again, just like Jen invited us to start telling a story, let's think, we're moving from observation to interpretation. So based on what you see, I think X, Y, or Z, but then also layer in that, how does it make me feel part? So the sentence stem that you see on the screen is, I think blank, and I feel blank. So fill in those gaps, please. And for a little teacher talk, this step 2 is just what Jen was alluding to when she was mentioning that slow looking helps us acknowledge and unpack our biases. So when we look at something, we start telling stories about it. When we look at someone, we often start to tell stories about it. And then we have feelings that we may need to acknowledge as flavoring the story that we tell. I see Jen still writing, so I bet others are too. So I'm just going to give you 10 more seconds. And now step 3 is wondering. Would you please write down 3 questions? What are you wondering about this artwork, about the people in the artwork, about anything that was sparked by the see and think that you did? Would you please write down 3 questions? here's the challenge. This is the part where we start to really push into a place of uncertainty. Would you please write 3 more questions? So really practice being curious. So now you've got this pool of questions. And if you were doing this with your students, you would have an opportunity to help them unpack difference between a closed-ended question, which the resulting answer is binary yes or no, what color is this red? It's that kind of question, right? And an open-ended question. An open-ended question that invites people to expound upon their answer, that requires more than a single word. So my challenge to you now is to review all of the questions that you just wrote and circle the ones that are open-ended, that invite somebody to tell more than just a single word in answer. These are questions that often begin with how and why, or for what reason, if you need a little tip. And maybe you noticed, because they're really comfortable questions to ask, that you've got a lot of closed-ended questions. So given the amount of time that we have, my challenge to you is to try to rewrite 2 of closed-ended questions as open-ended. So you're going to practice rephrasing your questions to make space for the other person. And an example might be, if I was asking one of the figures in this painting, is your tutu uncomfortable? Would be a closed-ended question. An open-ended question about the tutu might be, how do you feel when you wear that tutu? So practice opening your questions up. And again, just as a little bit of teacher talk, this is the kind of thing that invites students to practice skills and teaches them at the same time in a way that with a careful selection of artwork and in the culture that you create of trust and openness, gives them an opportunity to practice the skills in the presence of others. So you could do this in a discussion-based format as well, which some of the testing teachers did do. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little smidge of information, just as Jen did. And this time we're going to just see what happens. So John Carroll is the person who painted this artwork. He studied art throughout his life, and he painted this particular picture during the 1930s. He had served in the army in World War I just previous. So he's come home, and at the time he's painting it, traveling circuses are moving all over the United States. So we're sort of in the middle of the Great Depression. And aerialists like these challenged stereotypes of women at the time. So thinking about, what do we think of women? What do we think of risk? What do we think of strength? All of these different things. So he's painted a picture that challenges perhaps the way that women had been depicted previously. So with our last few minutes together, if you'll bring the next animation up, I'd like to invite you, with that little smidge of information that you've got about the painting, to imagine stepping into the shoes of one of these trapeze girls. And from that person's perspective, Would you please identify the question on your paper that you feel like would be the easiest one for that person to answer? Which one would be just like a snap? Yep, I can tell you that. Next, my invitation to you is to look at that same list of questions and imagining that you are that person that you've selected from the artwork. Which one would be the hardest or most difficult question to answer? Would you identify that one on your page? Which one is the hardest or most difficult one to answer? And then last, which would be the scariest or most vulnerable question to answer as that person? There's a really neat thinking routine called How Else and Why, which helps us think about the audience that we're speaking to. So if you've identified that one of these questions is potentially very scary to answer, you might challenge yourself or your students to consider how else you might ask that question and why you might ask it that way. So this is, of course, the start of a conversation, and we don't have time enough to do all of it. One of the things that was surfaced during the testing of these resources was that when students did this in conversation, they recognized that some people's easiest or most comfortable question to answer was other people's scariest. And that was data that came up over and over again. And it inspired some really rich conversations, not about personal life stuff necessarily, but just that interesting difference between people that we might assume some questions are quite easy to answer, but they may actually make others feel very vulnerable. So let's go ahead. We have just 3 minutes left, or 2.5 minutes left together. I just wanted to surface for you that some of the feedback we got on this activity, which you'll see on the next slide, is about de-rolling. So when you've invited students to take somebody else's perspective, especially somebody else where they're getting into those scary questions, you might want to offer students de-rolling strategies. And this is a very similar set of directions that Jen walked us through. So checking in with yourself. Do you have a feeling? How would you name it? Taking a breath, scanning your environment, and based on what you see in the world around you, choosing a coping strategy or a strategy that gets you back in your body that's appropriate for that space. So recognizing that not all actions are appropriate in every environment. Maybe you take a breath, you engage with your senses, and some other things that you see there. Saving time, though, to come back to our home metaphor. If you'll page us ahead one more, please. We are not going to have time enough for all of this. We were just so aspirational. But what we do have time for is another weather check. So checking in with yourself, would you please, in the Q&A, let us know what's your weather now? What is your weather now? And Jen, since we have just 1 minute left, is it okay if we put our resources up on the screen while they're answering this question?
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Cool.
Elizabeth. Yes. So as your internal weather forecast change comes in, I invite you to take a look at this slide of resources. You can visit this website, s.si.edu/reflect connect, so capital R, capital C, reflect connect. Well, you will learn a toolbox of resources for developing social and emotional learning skills, slow looking at art, there's lesson plans, student activities, and you can learn more about the artwork featured in today's session.
Thank you, everybody, for your attention, for your engagement. And I love seeing that there's a sunnier weather report on our screen.
Yep, less rainy, sunny and hopeful.
That's wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone.